Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching the lab setup video for DHCP in Windows Server 2003. In this video, we're going to take a look at our lab environment here so you have a better feel of what we have set up and configured going into this course. We're going to start off by taking a look at a diagram just to give you a better feel for what it looks like. Now currently we're sitting on XP1, okay, and this is the only client that we're dealing with right now, and it has an IP address of 192.168.1.1 with a 24-bit subnet mask. Now this machine will be configured as a DHCP client later on in this instruction. Right now it's just statically configured just so we can get a feel, make sure everything is set up correctly, our network is in place. The next machine we'll be going to is Server 1. And Server 1 is running 2003, and it has an IP address of 192.168.1.100. Okay, and this machine is our domain controller, and it's also our DNS server. Okay, so this has already been installed and configured on this machine. And our focus in the first lab is going to be on Server 2 here. Now, Server 2 has a static IP address of 192.168.1.200, and this machine will be acting as our DHCP server. Okay, so we're going to go through and install DHCP here, and then in later labs in this course, we'll be adding a third server. Just draw that in here, and this will also be a DHCP server, and this will be Server 3. Okay, and we'll go through this and the configuration of this a little bit later on, and you will see this utilized if you watch the DHCP concepts video already. This is where we did some of the testing and question answering on Server 3. Okay, so initially in the beginning portions of this course, you won't see Server 3, but we'll add that a little bit later on. Okay, so very basic setup. From a physical standpoint, all that we really have set up here, we've got a hub, okay, 3 computers, and then cables plugged into the hub right here. Everything over here is really, not necessary for this lab. Okay, so we don't need this set up. You may have this on a typical network where you have some sort of firewall device over here, Linksys router, a Windows 2000 server running NAT. In our case, we have a ISA server firewall that's blocking the internet from coming inbound. Okay, so let's go take a look at the actual computers right now. And here we have our base system. This is where all the recordings take place from. This is XP1. Okay, and you can tell that this is the base system because we have this train signal cover right here. This is the, similar to the cover of the DVD case. Okay, so whenever you see this, you know we're at the base system. This is the client, and this is where we'll be doing the majority of our testing from. Now, we've renamed my computer to XP1 just to also help in identifying this machine. Okay, so that's what we have here is just simply a right click and rename, and then we're showing this icon on the desktop by selecting this here. Okay, this machine also has a NetBIOS computer name of XP1, and you can see it's a member of a domain called wbc.local. Okay, and if we look down here, you can see that it is a member of a domain. Here's the computer name. Here's the fully qualified domain name as it's referred to, xp1.wbc.local. Okay, and WBC is for Wired Brain Coffee. All right, so this is XP1. Other configurations you want to look at, let's look at our IP address configurations quickly. Okay, here we've got statically configured, like we mentioned before, 192.168.1.1 address, a 24-bit subnet mask, 8 bits, 8 bits, and 8, so 255.255.255.0, and a gateway that is pointing out to that ISA server firewall that I was mentioning before. Okay, now we have DNS configured, in a normal network environment, you would have DNS configured as you see here. This is pointing to our one and only DNS server on this network, and that's going to be the next system we go to. It's named Server 1, 192.168.1.100. Okay, everything else is a standard installation on this XP system. You do see we have 2 network cards here. The second one is disabled, which I recommend if you have a situation like that set up in your computer. Okay, so now we're going to form a remote desktop connection over to Server 1, and Server 1, as we mentioned, is located at 192.168.1.100. So we can connect to it by name right now or by IP address. Okay, now we're connecting over to Server 1. Okay, and this machine is our domain controller and DNS server. And you can recognize server 1 because it's going to have a blue background as you see here. And we also have my computer renamed similar to how we did on XP1. You'll see that it's renamed to server 1 when we get over there. Okay, you see that right here. And we've done the same thing. We just right-clicked server 1, went down to rename, renamed my computer, and then we've also showed this on the desktop. Now, one more configuration that we've done on the system is we've enabled remote desktop. And this is only necessary for our video recording purposes so we can show you what it looks like over here. We've just clicked this checkbox to enable remote desktop and then clicked OK. Now, another thing you may note here, this system that we're running this on, first off, we're running an evaluation copy. So, if you're running the same thing, no problem whatsoever. You can use evaluation copies, and we do recommend that when you're training on Microsoft products. And we've got low-end systems here. We're talking about an Intel Pentium 2 processor. It's a 400 megahertz machine, only 160 megabytes of RAM, and it's supporting this Active Directory domain controller. Now, this is not ideal for a production environment, but for a lab computer, hey, it works perfectly fine because we're not really using the system too heavily, and you'll see that it's, it doesn't really respond too slowly when we're going through and taking a look at, the different configurations. Now, to also set this machine up, there was a couple things that had to happen. The most important of that was going to start, run, and then running DC promo. Okay, now Active Directory is already installed on this system. So what you'll need to do is turn server 1 into a domain controller, and it's fairly straightforward how you would do that. Okay, so run DC promo, click OK. When we do it here, it's going to tell us this machine is already a domain controller. So if we went through this right now, it would be going through the process of uninstalling Active Directory from this machine, which is not what we want to do. So we're going to quit this wizard, but you can go through and do a pretty standard option choice, choosing all the defaults when you're going through and running DC promo on your server machine. Okay, so the domain environment honestly is not that important. The name of the domain is not that important as long as you maintain consistency throughout this lab environment. Okay, so that's really all that we have to look at here. We will take a quick look, though, before we go at the network card properties. One network card. And this machine is just configured, as we mentioned before, with a 192.168.1.100 IP address. Since this is the DNS server, it's pointing to itself for its DNS name resolutions, and this is the appropriate configuration and setting that you want to have. Okay, so let's close down here. And next we're going to connect over to server 2. And server 2, as we mentioned, is going to be acting as our DHCP server throughout this lab. Now, server 2 is also running Windows Server 2003. It's running Enterprise Edition, and it is an evaluation copy. This machine is most likely very similarly configured as far as it being a Pentium 2 400 megahertz processor and 160 megabytes of RAM. It may have a little bit more, and we'll check on that here in a second once the system logs on, but if it does, it won't have much more. Now, currently, server 2 is a member server of our Active Directory domain. It's same as XP1. It's a member of that wbc.local Active Directory domain. Okay, so let's go take a look at that first, just to confirm that. Okay, you can see that the computer name is server 2. The domain name wbc.local. Okay, it's a member of this domain. So to do that, we just went exactly here, typed in wbc.local, clicked OK, and made it a member of this domain. Okay, so we have a real simple network environment here. And you can see this machine is even a smaller processor. It's only 350 megahertz. Okay, and we don't really put a lot of stress and burden on these machines when we're going through a test situation. So no big deal if you have similar hardware. Remote desktop is enabled just like we had on server 1. Okay, and the one thing we don't have here, which we'll change right now, is to rename this to server 2. And then we'll put this on the desktop, so if you ever have questions, it's real simple for you to know where we're at. Okay, show on desktop. And one last thing we'll do here too, we're going to switch this desktop background here to a black color. Okay, that way you'll be able to identify this right away as just being different than that blue background when we're managing this. Okay, so server 2, black background, server 1, blue background, and then our XP machine here with the train signal logo. Okay, so fairly simple setup. The main thing you need to do is just make sure that you get a simple network setup like this. Okay, 3 computers, low-end systems are great, a hub, okay, network cabling, so these 3 machines are plugged into the same physical network. On the surface, the most important thing I can think of is to make sure your IP address settings are consistent and configured correctly. Make sure that you have same network ID and the same network mask configured. After you get that done, your next big step, I would suppose, would be to make server 1 a domain controller. And you can, if you have any of our other videos or even the server 2000 portion, you can follow the same steps that you see in the server 2000 portion of these DHCP videos if you need some more help getting Active Directory installed on server 1. Fairly straightforward process though. After you have that, then you're just making XP1 and server 2 a member of this Active Directory domain that you named down here. And that's pretty much it. That's all that you need to do to get started. And we're going to pick up right from there in Lab 1 and get moving on installing DHCP in Server 2003.